Well, it is right at 3 o'clock. So I want to start by saying hello and welcome to Protocol's second virtual meetup. In our first Brain Trust Live, we have a really fantastic panel coming up on the future of cloud apps, the future of cloud app development and investment. But first, by way of introduction, my name is Kevin McAllister. I'm an associate editor here at Protocol, and I work on Brain Trust. For those of you who aren't familiar with Braintrust, it's a group that we have impaneled here at Protocol, genuine experts that we are asking some of the biggest forward-looking questions about tech. And so we're really excited to be here. I figure we should start off with some introductions, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tom. Tom, how are you?
I'm good, Kevin. Thanks for having us on the meetup here. I'm a senior reporter at Protocol. I cover cloud computing and enterprise software. I've been writing about various aspects of that for the last 5 years, and glad to see we have a great group of folks here today.
Well, speaking of that great group, Abby, would you mind introducing yourself and letting everyone know a little bit about yourself?
Hey, thanks. Abby Kearns, CEO of Cloud Foundry Foundation, and I have spent a long time in cloud and the last 20 years in enterprise infrastructure. And so I'm excited to be here with you.
Thank you very much. Jonathan, we'll go to you next.
Hey folks, my name is Jonathan Heiliger. I'm a general partner at Vertex Ventures US, which is a fund we started about 5 years ago. Prior to that, spent a couple of decades doing utility computing, which I think we now call cloud computing at places like Facebook and Walmart and a company called Opsware.
Thank you, Jonathan. And last, but certainly not least, Sash, would you mind giving us a little introduction?
Sunkara. I'm currently at a company called Kontain, working on container technology, running products and business development. But prior to that, I started a company called Ratware in cloud management software, where we migrated, provided disaster recovery and management solutions for enterprises going to the cloud. So lots of experience with cloud as well as containers.
Thank you very much. And before we kind of get right into it, Tom, I thought we might turn it over to you for a second. You are reporting all the time on what's going on in cloud and enterprise computing. I'm wondering if you can give us just a little bit of a lay of the land, how we got going with this particular panel, how we decided on the topic, and then a little bit of an overview.
Sure. Well, one thing I think, is kind of unique about cloud is that the word cloud often means two different things. There's the whole practice of, outsourcing your server management to another provider, but cloud is a whole new way of building software. And I don't think that portion of it gets discussed quite as much. In order to really take advantage of some of the opportunities that are provided by cloud computing, you need to rethink the way you build applications. And so that's really a lot of what we wanted to talk about today was some of these newer strategies that people are employing, some pros, some cons about some of the ways that companies make decisions about how to build applications, and really what's possible. I think a lot of people who are trying right now to evaluate cloud providers or cloud services in general don't necessarily know what makes the most sense for their business and their app, and so that's one of the things we wanted to do today was talk a little bit about some of the things out there that are getting a lot of traction and are seeing a lot of adoption, and that might make sense for your business depending on your needs.
And with that, speaking of some of those strategies, the question that we had posed to our Brain Trust members this week was about what investment would be the smartest way for companies to go if they were new to developing cloud apps. And Abby, we're going to start with you again here. You focused in your answer on organizational readiness, and this is a luxury we don't usually have when we ask Brain Trust questions, but I'm curious how you kind of arrived on that. If you can give us a little bit of a walkthrough on your thought process.
Well, it's like this. You can buy all of the technologies, but there is no such thing as a silver bullet technology that's going to make your organization better or faster. You can leverage technology to automate more of the processes and leverage technology in ways to make your business better. But until you have the capabilities to work with that technology iterate and innovate quickly, it's not necessarily going to add that value. So for me, when I think of where do you prioritize your spend and your investment, it's going to be on that cultural transformation to take advantage of those technologies.
Have you found any, particular strategies that have been effective in trying to institute that kind of change, that kind of transformational change that you mentioned?
Yeah, the companies that I think are doing it best are enterprise companies that are investing heavily in upskilling and reskilling their workforce, really helping bring the talent that they have today and leveling up to understand how to work with cloud native applications and work with cloud native infrastructure and to work with continuous delivery practices and agile practices. Those are things that you can upskill your workforce to learn. And it's not necessarily advisable to think you're going to be able to go out and hire all of that talent to solve that problem for your business. So for me, companies that are investing heavily in programs to upskill and reskill are the ones that I think are going to, one, not only be successful, but also be here in the long run.
Sash, you focused on microservices. Kind of the same question. Can you give us a little bit of insight on your thought process, how you decided on that as being the smartest investment for companies new to this?
Yeah, so I think the investment in microservices specifically in really being able to focus on the architecture and breaking up your applications into the smallest tasks and to single functions in a container allows you to scale. But more importantly, it will build resilience, not just in your application, but also build resilience in your infrastructure as well as your organization. If you think about our time right now as we're all sitting at home and we think about applications not running or systems failing or having dependencies on people who aren't available, if you do make that investment in microservices, you can break that interdependency across your organization, but you can also scale. So for example, unemployment, as you know, a lot of people are getting laid off right now, and a lot of people are applying for unemployment benefits. I think hundreds of thousands applied in the last couple of days. Systems are breaking down. They can't get in. They can't even submit. And that number is just going to grow. It's going to grow to millions. And if you think about how that application works, it's a big monolithic application, and that's probably breaking down, can't handle the load. The infrastructure can't handle the load, and they're not the people around to be able to help you fix those problems. So if you think about, hey, I can break up that application to very, very small tasks. I can break the interdependency that Sam has on Joe. And then now I'm only getting infrastructure that I need as those tasks are going out and coming down. That really builds in that resiliency. So if you think about our time right now, I think organizations need to think about, if this happens again, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with it? And I think organizations are really need to reflect right now and going, how will I deal with the next emergency?
It's interesting that you bring that up. We actually, Mike Murphy from Protocol just wrote a story about this yesterday, about some state agencies who are just overwhelmed with demand from unexpected demand for that service. I wanted to ask you a little bit more specifically about this question of microservices, because I think that the architectural benefits are pretty well understood, but I'm wondering about the complexity of it, in terms of like an agency or a department or an enterprise company that has been doing things a certain way for a long time knows they need to modernize, but how much change, I guess, is too much change too fast, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because if you think, hey, microservices are the panacea, why isn't everybody there already, right? So, the challenges are, you do have to architecturally change. You have to look at your application and think about, how do I break that up? How do I break that up in a way that doesn't take a long time, doesn't take a lot of resources, doesn't take a lot of investment? So there is that challenge. There is the training as well. Like, Abby talked about, you do have to train the staff to think about how to do application and software development in a different way. So there is a level of investment there. There's another thing. There's, when we think about containers and Docker's, the popular solutions around containers, there's still a security issue. It's a shared kernel. And so enterprises specifically, and enterprise operations specifically, are concerned about security. So those are the things that we have to deal with. There are solutions out there that deal with the security piece. They're newer technologies. The cloud providers are dealing with this, software organizations and ISVs are delivering solutions to handle that. There is an investment that enterprises have to make to think about, how do we architect, how do we train, how do we educate, how do we continuously do this to move forward? But I think that investment will pay off. Again, we're in really scary times, right? And you think about, you know what I mean? If this is unprecedented, all of us sitting at home is unprecedented. But if you think it could happen again, what are we going to do? So I think it's worth the investment. And I think the technology has come a long way from containers and microservices from when it was introduced in 2013 and 14. There are security solutions. There are ways to be able to do this, but I think organizations have to take a hard look.
I think I wanted to kind of build on some of Abby's comments about organizational change and why that's necessary. I was just doing some quick and dirty homework here. Java 8, which was introduced in 2014, is still the most widely used language inside of enterprises, both in the cloud and self-hosted. But it's important to note that was Java 8, not Java 1. Kubernetes, I think, came out about the same time, but that was sort of the coming out party for Kubernetes. Rebuilding applications starts with organizational change and retraining and upskilling. And you can definitely build new applications and new methodologies and new ways. But folks, there's a huge library, a huge back catalog of applications inside of organizations, big and small, that have to be rethought, re-architected, and even maybe reimagined. The unemployment application is a great example. If anyone's used a state service recently, whether it's the unemployment site or the DMV or something like that, it's pretty obvious that it's an old and non-scalable system.
I think that's a really good point, because I don't think, hey, we're going to turn on a dime and everybody's going to go, okay, we're going to re-architect everything and we're going to be developing in this way. I think from an enterprise perspective, there's a spectrum. There's existing applications that aren't going away, but there is a new way of developing new applications, and I think that's a transition. That's not going to happen in a year. That's not going to happen in a couple of years. I think it's the next decade. But I think we're starting to see that movement. And I guess I want to say one more thing about existing, and people call them legacy, but I call them existing applications because they aren't going away. There's the ability to migrate those. There is the ability to provide a level of scale by going to the cloud, by updating the infrastructure, by putting other management solutions around it, self-service, and things like that allow them to scale. So there are solutions for existing applications, but there's definitely an evolution that I think government as well as enterprises have to adopt to, ensure the scale that is needed for their customers and their clients.
And speaking of that scaling, just to give you the same opportunity, Jonathan, you had talked about circuit breakers in your response about investment in developing the new cloud app technology. Curious if you can go a little bit more into kind of maybe how that would apply to some of the situations that you and Sash have laid out already.
Yeah, sure. So I think I was talking about circuit breakers are a way of maybe diverting traffic or creating off ramps for the sort of three methods. One, diverting traffic. Two, creating off ramps and sort of shunting traffic to other places, maybe a backup site or something like that. And then the third, I think most common implementation are actually sort of descaling features of an application. So for example, you might change the refresh rate or the response time of your application from 1 millisecond to 100 milliseconds, to relieve pressure on the database. I think that thinking about those things, meaning what can break, especially in a microservices environment or any kind of distributed system, when it's being built, before it's maybe scaled 100x or 1,000x or 10,000x, are important. Because if those pathways are put in place by developers, that ultimately gives the developer a lot of flexibility to not only deal with high traffic, but they can offload that function to an SRE or a site reliability engineering team, or DevOps is often conflated with, or even give those controls and knobs to product managers or other people inside of the organization, so that developer, quite frankly, doesn't become the bottleneck to scaling or bug fixing or sort of putting the site back together again if it breaks.
That approach makes a lot of sense to me if you're talking about something that's net new. But if you're talking about migrating an existing application that already has a lot of usage, already has a lot of traffic, is somewhat mission critical, at least enough to want to consider adding in this flexibility. How do you manage that for that kind of scenario?
Well, I mean, the sort of immediate thing you can do is you can dive right into the code and change variables and change database retries, things like that. I think thankfully most of the existing applications tend to be thought of in 3 tiers. So, some kind of web presentation layer, application middleware, and then the database it talks to. And so there are 3 logical places there to sort of tweak configurations, change both in the applications themselves and as well as the underlying hardware. Or quite frankly, we're in full disclosure, we're investors in a company called LaunchDarkly. It's literally a little bit of JavaScript include. So, and they've built SDKs for many other languages as well. So it's really easy for a developer to implement circuit breakers and feature flags. But like you said, it's still an existing application that's up and running that requires change review and process and all those kinds of things. But quite frankly, that might be better to do in a time of calm rather than in a time of disaster and panic once an application is being bombarded with traffic.
I think that gets to the point that you should be building that resiliency for existing applications as well as new applications that are being developed. And a lot of solutions out there today don't have that resiliency. So to your point, you do want to do it in a time of calm, but ultimately you end up dealing with these things when there's an emergency and you don't have a good resiliency plan in place. You haven't, don't have a redundancy, somewhere, you haven't replicated somewhere else that allows you to do this.
I mean, I think the other methodology we see happening frequently are fire drills, which is sort of like a scalability test, a failover test. There's open source frameworks you can use that developers can use to sort of run these scenarios. Or again, just speaking to organizational change, you can architect a fire drill in a Word document, right? And sort of describe, hey, this person is unavailable. Then this happens. Then these systems fail. And run that test and be able to stress test the system again during normal times rather than during panic mode.
Or a DR drill. So with the cloud, you get that benefit, right? You can do a DR drill more than just on paper. Actually run through the whole thing. You have the automation, be able to actually fail over to a cloud, be able to do whatever changes you're doing, and then be able to come back and not disrupt the use of that application or disrupt your users. I mean, that's happening today. More and more people are doing it because from an audit perspective and a compliance perspective, they're being asked to do it. But yeah, I think that's a really good point.
So we've talked about some, kind of philosophies that are involved here with respect to app development on the cloud. And I was wondering if you could all share what you're seeing in terms of some specific technologies that you're seeing adopted. Different types of open source projects or different types of commercial projects. What are people using right now to build next generation cloud applications?
A little bit of everything. There's definitely a huge market landscape. I don't want to pick and choose at the moment, but so I'll let someone else speak on that topic.
Well, you are literally picking and choosing things that you think are promising, right? in your day-to-day job. So
to a degree, yeah, to a degree.
Well, I'll jump in. So, I mean, I think that, people are doing everything from, hey, being able to use Docker, Kubernetes, as we talked about, but also people are doing things like function as a service, where they're really specifically, piecemealing their software. They're not worrying about the underlying infrastructure. They just have a function that needs to run. They're using Amazon's Lambda or Azure Functions or Google Functions to be able to do it. So those are some of the things that people are doing. One of I think the exciting things that's coming out of the market is, we've had this world of virtual machines, right? And then we have this world of containers. Virtual machines are great, right? They're secure, they're isolated, people know how to use them, but people are moving to, or looking at containers or starting to use containers because you can deploy them faster, they're much more flexible, but there's definitely a security issue. So we are seeing technologies where the benefits of isolation and security from VMs are being brought together with the speed and the flexibility and packaging of containers. Those coming together will allow much more flexibility from the developer and much more peace of mind from an operations perspective. So that's kind of what we're seeing in the marketplace.
I would add the most interesting thing that's happening right now is also that we're in the middle of rewriting the technology that got us here. So we are starting to see an emergence of new technologies, primarily open source technologies that serve as the fundamentals for what will be the future of the cloud when we talk about cloud native infrastructure, cloud native architectures. And so for me, it's been really interesting to see that shift of a lot of that innovation and evolution happening in open source. But make no mistake, we're in the midst of rebuilding everything that got us here. And so there's still a lot of innovation work to come to get us where we're going to be over the next 3, 4, 5 years as we start to hit real scale on these cloud-based infrastructures.
Is that, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say one more thing I wanted to mention, and before we end it, is I think one of the really, really exciting things that's happening in the marketplace, and it's a longer term, market that we're seeing develop is edge, right? Edge computing, and edge being, everything around IoT. So the, advent of autonomous vehicles, robots, drones. All of these things at the edge are collecting tons and tons and tons of information and data that needs to be processed to be able to make decisions. And one of the things that, I think we're in the early days of is you have this cloud where it's sort of this central thing, right? Where if you put, if all the processing is done in this central place, with the edge, with all of this new data, with all of these new devices collecting all of this information, having to make real-time decisions, that has to happen at the edge, at where you're capturing that data. So we're starting to see a lot more of that come out, especially with machine learning and AI. You're starting to be able to make those decisions out there. And then also with the rollout of 5G, you're starting to get the networks and the latency that's required to be able to make those kind of decisions in real time. So I think that's going to be interesting. And where containers plays there is the smallness of containers, the fast, the ability to deploy quickly is going to become very valuable with edge computing and IoT and machine learning.
I am sure Tom has a follow-up on that, but before we get there, just want to call attention to the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. If you guys have questions, please feel free to send them through and we can answer them live here. But Tom, I have a feeling you have a follow-up.
Yeah, a more general follow-up, actually. I mean, I think that we can't really ignore the elephant in the room at the moment, and I wanted to hear directly from all of you sort of what you're seeing in the market right now with respect to business investment. Are people postponing cloud upgrades? Are they picking and choosing much more carefully which types of projects they want to take on? And maybe it's a little too early to assess that, but I figured this would be a good opportunity to get the opinions of people who are seeing companies struggle with these decisions right now.
I'd say so far we've been talking to all of our portfolio companies, fellow venture investors, enterprises, et cetera, and the answer is all over the map. But I'd say heavily weighted towards wait and see. We're sort of pausing purchases. We are seeing people pause purchases all across the board, big companies, little companies, et cetera. And I think there's a few on the edge, maybe call it 10%, who are actually accelerating purchases because they're worried about a budget freeze or a project freeze or shutdown, and they're like, hey, we've had this thing in the pipeline for weeks or months, and let's just push it forward and get it all signed off and going, because it can generally make a case for why having this particular tool or piece of software is actually going to enable them to move faster. So a little bit of innovation, or more realistically to cut cost, knowing that that's going to be the next shoe to drop inside of a big enterprise. And then the third reason is the best one is, hey, if we can roll out a new feature or a new application or an upgrade even faster, we can make more money, and you know, we can scale our site. There's a lot of e-commerce sites who are or e-commerce divisions of big box retailers that are seeing unprecedented traffic levels, and they're throwing all of their resources into that division because it's, you know, it's the only one with the lights still on that's still functioning. So, you know, I think it's definitely you know, it's an unprecedented time. I think we can all appreciate that, and you know, there's no playbook for how to deal with this. But I think our message, at least to the companies and folks we've been talking to, is don't panic. Like, take a breath, be systematic, take care of, you know, your employees, take care of your customers, talk to your customers. You know, this is the time when technology might actually be able to be a helpful solution to a business that's suffering massive losses, as compared to, you know, just an opportunity to sort of, you know, accelerate their innovation.
We're selling to the enterprise, and we talk to our clients all the time. And during this time, I don't think we're seeing acceleration of purchases, but we're not seeing things on hold either. So people are moving forward, maybe slower than they would have. But I see, you know, it hasn't stopped. So people are moving forward. And again, you know, we're sort of in tech and IT. So, you know, it's not, you know, a brick and mortar, but so we're seeing things move forward. It's slower, but it's still progressing.
Abby,
and I would say that I was just going to add that I will be curious to see over the next 4 weeks if we'll clearly continue to see investments in technology that can automate and the level of automation to manage a lot of the infrastructure and the applications. But I will be curious to see if the migration of applications and application workloads to the cloud slow down and there's a retrenchment, or if they speed up in an effort to defer more CapEx costs. So that's something I'm actually watching to see if that changes the pace of migration to the cloud.
I think we'll actually take a question that was submitted now, and I'll kind of pose this to everyone again, so feel free to jump in. The question is, how do you see the relationship between DevOps and machine learning evolving? Do you see either of these two roles compensating for the other, or will a new career or field emerge as we move forward?
From my perspective, I see them actually coming closer together, where you start seeing a lot of the automation, particularly around managing of the infrastructure and the application workloads, and the roles that people have to manage both of those things, coming together with machine learning and AI, where we're seeing a lot more event-driven automated responses to everything from config management to patching. I mean, that's where I would say the future is going to be. But for right now, they're kind of holding different paths. But I would say we'll probably eventually see a convergence.
I tend to agree. I think there will be a convergence there. I think some of that's already there, to be honest, you know, where you're learning about what's going on, and that's how, you know, things from, you know, the automation started taking that into account as it, you know, provisions new infrastructure, parks infrastructure, parks applications, and things like that. So I think they'll converge even more into the future.
I've got maybe a slightly different take, which is I've seen a couple of waves of companies come and go that have promised, you know, full AI and machine learning based systems to automate provisioning, scaling, troubleshooting, et cetera. And, you know, they basically promise us the matrix, and maybe someday we'll get there and a bunch of other cool things will happen, and, you know, there'll be Terminator robots running through the streets. But until then, whenever someone shows up knocks on an enterprise's door and says, hey, I'd like to sell you a predictability solution, the first thing that a buyer says is, great, I'm going to run a 1-year POC to see if your predictions are actually true and accurate. You know, but before I'm willing to sort of commit and depend on it. So while I think there are lots of neat regression algorithms and some really basic machine learning that's being applied to, you know, redistributing load in the cloud or switching from reserved instances to spot instances, and there's, you know, several businesses like that to help you automate and reduce your cloud spend bills. Those things are great and easy. But when it comes to, you know, a system that can automatically sort of scale and remediate problems in a complex web application with hundreds of microservices, I just don't see that happening in the near term. Instead, what I see are actually tools that could give engineers more superpowers. So, we've seen a lot of tools that try to bring together data from disparate systems. Everyone uses Splunk for logging, but it's kind of a basic tool. And then there's all these companies that have built enrichment systems on top of it. Or there's companies who have built next generation monitoring, companies like SignalFX, which Splunk just acquired, that competes with Datadog and Aptly and that whole category of things to have more insights into the system more rapidly. But I think that's different than kind of full and complete automation and sort of the promise of the matrix, as I said.
So that, kind of segues well into another audience question that we had, which was, are you observing any meaningful trends in developer tools in terms of, what are the tools that developers want to use right now to get their work done on the cloud?
I think like the earlier question about what are the sort of trends or tools being adopted, we're seeing a lot. Eclipse is still the #1 IDE out there, maybe not surprisingly because of Java. But I think the tool chain is maybe changing just as rapidly as the underlying technology is. Whether it be sort of what's happening in the Cloud Foundry organization or in CNCF, there's lots of different things happening from starting with how developers code through to how they release code into production, CI and CD, through to how then that code is maintained and penetration tested and all of those things. Quite frankly, though, I think one of the most exciting things to happen in that camp are the rise of so-called kind of no-code, low-code platforms. Think of these as like the next generation of Heroku and other kinds of PaaS environments that make it easier, or for kind of dumb people like me to become developers, rather than having to study a language for a long time and build more and more complicated applications. The interpreters themselves, the language interpreters, are becoming more powerful, more feature rich, whether it's with example code or integrating systems, and so that again non-technical people can build simple applications themselves and then get value directly back from that. And I think that's got to be one of the most exciting things to happen in development, and because it bleeds then into data science and data analytics as well.
I just have one comment here is, we talked a lot about Java, which obviously we see lots and lots of Java out there, but with the deployment of microservices and new architectures, we're also seeing, newer languages, take off, such as Golang. And I think that's exciting, and I think we'll see a more transition to those types of languages as we move forward in this evolution.
Totally agree.
Abby, any closing thoughts on that?
No, I'm just plus one to what Jonathan said. I think we're seeing definitely an evolution of the tools, but also I do think there is there's still so much room for opportunity to simplify things like low code, no code, and other things. I don't think anything that makes it easier for everyone to develop and deploy applications is where I think directionally we're going to go, and to make it easier for everyone to have the accessibility to do that.
Well, I am cognizant of the time and think that's a good forward-thinking thought potentially to end on. Abby, Jonathan, and Sasha, I really want to thank you for taking some time. Tom, always great to have your expertise as we kind of explored a little bit more into cloud app development and the future of cloud apps and enterprise investing. So with that, I think what I will say is be sure to subscribe to Tom's brand new cloud newsletter at protocol.com/cloud. There's a link in the chat function if you open it up. And be sure also to check out Abby, Jonathan, and Sasha's answers in this week's Braintrust and all the Braintrusts from weeks prior at protocol.com/Braintrust. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. Hope you learned a little something, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.